Hello, everyone, and welcome back in to another edition of Inquirer Live at Game Day Central. Today, we are coming to you live from the press box here at Hard Rock Stadium, where in just a little bit, the Philadelphia Eagles will play the Miami Dolphins in the third and final preseason game. I am Eagles beat reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Josh Tolentino. And as always, I am joined by my co host and fellow beat reporter, EJ Smith. EJ, we were back home in Philly for it seemed like what was a day after finishing up joint practices in the second game in Cleveland. And we've been in Miami for almost a week now, man. How are you feeling down here, just a few miles away from South Beach, my guy?
I am doing pretty good, man. I mean, I feel like the weather's been hot, but it's kind of a welcome change for sure. You didn't mention that we're birthday twins at the top of the show, but I spent a lot of years spending my birthday at football practice, whether it was my own practices or the Eagles practices. So having a day off in Miami yesterday for our birthday, I mean, come on, that's a pretty lucky draw right there.
Yeah, you can't beat that the way these schedule odds makers kind of played out the preseason here, having a birthday here on the off day in Miami. But here we are at the press box. There will be a game tonight. Again, it is the final preseason game, and I just want to remind all of our viewers, all of our subscribers, tuning in from back home, whichever platform you are on, throughout the season, throughout the preseason, the regular season, and the postseason, all year long, you can join me and EJ here on Game Day Central and we will tell you everything you need to know about these Eagles. EJ, what is the best place that they could find us?
Yeah, Josh, they can find us at inquire.com/Eagles game day. That's where we like to have a conversation with you guys throughout the game. You could put your questions and comments in there, and we'll interact with you in the middle of the game. We sometimes we're checking it between plays, sometimes between quarters. We're going to give you our analysis, and we'd love to hear from you. And also, we take some of those questions and we put them in what's my personal favorite segment of the show, which is what you said is what we call. We'll get to that later on in the show.
Of course, EJ. But first, again, before we get to that section that we love discussing our reader comments and questions, let's discuss what's the latest with this team, EJ. As we mentioned at the top of the show, this is the third and final preseason game for these Philadelphia Eagles. EJ, it felt like a little journey throughout Miami this week. The team hosted their first joint practice with the Dolphins this past Wednesday. It was a really intense session, especially with what players even mentioned, the hot temperatures down here, the humidity that they had to get used to during that practice. And it seemed like everyone was ready to go into Thursday's second scheduled session. But unfortunately for both teams, the Dolphins, they had a stomach bug, a stomach flu was kind of described by the team and reports. And again, the Dolphins had to cancel that second session. The Eagles still did practice, so we were able to see the team for about another 2 hours on the field at the Dolphins facility, a very beautiful facility recently completed, I believe, $125 million there from owner Steve Ross. But the Eagles were able to make use of those facilities and still get another practice in, although it wasn't a joint session with the Dolphins. EJ, I guess, how do you think that affected the Eagles specifically here as we head into the preseason finale? And backtracking to that first day, what did you think of the work that the team got there with the Dolphins there in the first session?
Yeah, it's like the most complicated team on team practice you could possibly have on Thursday. Like travel all this way just to practice against the same guys you practice against at NovaCare, right? But I mean,
Mhm.
I don't think that I take the Eagles coaches at their word when they talk about how valuable these joint practices have been for them. So I do think that it was a missed opportunity. I mean, you mentioned Wednesday's practice. I think that was a as definitive as you can be in a joint practice. I thought the Dolphins played a lot better than the Eagles did. I thought both sides of the ball, Miami had an advantage. So I do think that seeing the Eagles the next day when they were maybe a little bit more settled into being in Miami, a little bit more acclimated to the temperature, it would have been interesting to see how they bounce back after a rough practice on Wednesday. Um, But that being said, I think that the game will be important for a lot of guys, especially because they didn't get those reps on that Thursday practice. And, I mean, that Thursday practice still had, some value. The Eagles went team heavy that day. They were out there for probably about an hour before they went in for a walkthrough that was closed to the media. It was during the indoor part of the Dolphins facility. So, yeah, I do think that the Thursday practice being canceled by the Dolphins was a bit of a missed opportunity to kind of get a little bit more of a sense of where the Eagles were at. But in the grand scheme of things, do I think it's going to affect the regular season? Probably not too much.
All right, EJ, you mentioned Wednesday's practice. Let's really hone in on that specific session with the Dolphins because, again, that was the purpose of them traveling here earlier to have these joint sessions with them. During that time, let's focus specifically on the offense because what we saw from Jalen Hurts, the starting quarterback, heading into his second season as a starter, third year in the NFL, a little bit of inconsistency from Jalen. It wasn't, in our view, a stellar practice for him. There were really no downfield, kind of crazy attempts. I mean, he did have a deep ball to Devontae that he connected with. That was good for about a 40-yard game. But during those full team sessions, it felt like the Dolphins, who were without their top cornerbacks, and Xavier Howard, who's been limited here throughout the preseason, and Byron Jones, who is on the PUP. A lot of checkdowns, but as I mentioned, these checkdowns, I want to definitely include Nick Sirianni, the coach of the Eagles, statement on Jalen when it was a pretty bold statement, EJ, and I think both of us wrote and have discussed this over the past few days. But he's described Wednesday's practice against the Miami Dolphins as Jalen Hurts' best session since he's been an Eagle, or since Nick Sirianni's recollection, since he's been his head coach now since this past winter, so or last year's winter, excuse me. So, EJ, what was your take on that? What was your understanding of Nick Sirianni going out and saying that? Not necessarily defending Jalen, but from what we saw, and then obviously what Nick Sirianni saw, and he's the one scripting out these plays and these practices. What were your observations of Jalen Hurts against the Dolphins on that Wednesday joint session?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of sit on both sides of the fence here. Nick Sirianni knows a lot more about the framework
Hmm.
of what's going on at practice than we do. Obviously, he's the one. Whether or not he's calling the plays, he's much more in tune with what the play is supposed to look like, what the execution's supposed to be. He's going to understand a lot better than us if somebody blew an assignment, if somebody ran the wrong route, if somebody was at the wrong, in the wrong space or something like that. He knows that better than we do. But on the flip side, of course, he's going to tell us that Jalen looks awesome, and he's going to want to paint a rosy picture of it when he can. So I think what it suggests is that maybe some of the things that Jalen struggled with on Wednesday that we sort of noticed, near interceptions and maybe a couple of inaccurate passes. Maybe that wasn't so much on him as it was on the framework of the offense. I do think what you can read into what Nick Sirianni was saying there is that the offense as a whole didn't have a very good day. Maybe it wasn't all on Jalen. So I think that to glean anything more from it, again, like of course he's going to say that Jalen looks great right now, and I do think that the general impression of Jalen has been that he's had a good camp. He's made some strides in some particular areas that he's needed to. Do I think it was necessarily his best practice from an outsider's view? I don't think so. I mean, I've seen him have better days for sure, especially as you mentioned, pushing the ball down the field with timing and anticipation. But I do think that there is something to be kind of you can read something into what Nick said about that. Kind of maybe it was the offense as a whole rather than Jalen specifically.
Of course, and we will continue to discuss the quarterback and the offense all throughout the show. I know there are many questions and comments in our section later called "What You Said" that EJ mentioned at the top of the show, but. Um, a very heated kind of discussion here on Jalen Hurts' practice performance against these Miami Dolphins. And, last week, obviously, Jalen did not play in the second preseason game. There was some weather involved in that game in Cleveland with rain coming down before the game. It's been pretty clear here as I look out onto the field in Miami. I'd still be surprised if we saw Hurts or really any of those starters that sat out in last week's game. Again, we'll continue to discuss that all throughout later. But I think really this third and final preseason game is about those depth guys that are really trying to fight for a roster spot. EJ, I'll mention it right here, but it seems like training camp started exactly a month ago, and it actually did on that Wednesday, July 27th. Here we are on Saturday, August 27th, and the roster cutdown day, EJ. It flew by, but it is on Tuesday. The team has to get down from 80 to 53 players by Tuesday. EJ, Howie Roseman, he's got a busy few days here ahead of him.
Yeah, no, I mean this team. I feel like last year when we were coming out of training camp, you know, it sort of felt like the bottom 15 guys on the roster. Were kind of that was kind of the weak point of the roster. At that point, like you sort of look at that group and you sort of see like those third stringers. I feel like they were kind of still trying to figure out that bottom third of the roster. This year, I think that they've got a little bit more talent on that spot. I think if you look at the 53 as a whole, when you start to do your projections, you start to realize like they're going to have some tough decisions to make in certain areas. Do they go do they go light at running back? Do they go light at tight end? The Eagles have a history of being heavy on the offensive and defensive lines. Do they go with 10? Do they go with 9? What do they do at quarterback? So there's a lot of stuff that is going to be really interesting to see. And the other thing that's going to be really interesting to watch is like how do trades play into this? Do we see somebody like Andre Dillard or Jalen Rager on the move because they have value. Maybe they have value elsewhere, especially Andre Dillard as all these offensive tackles across the league get injured. So there's a lot that's going to happen probably between tonight and Tuesday afternoon. And we'll be you guys. Shameless plug. You guys got to keep an eye on. Got to keep up with our updates because there's going to be news. We know that. We know that much. So
Of course, EJ, and you mentioned those two specific names with Andre Dillard and Jalen Rager. Our colleague Jeff McClain wrote on that exact situation earlier in the week. You can read his column at Inquirer.com. /Eagles. EJ, let's transition into who's hurt and who's healthy here entering the preseason finale. I mean, the Eagles, I mean, they're relatively healthy, but there are still some notable injuries and obviously absences that have occurred throughout the preseason, throughout training camp. I'm going to mention the main ones here. Running back Miles Sanders, he has not participated in practice in over a week. He's been out with a hamstring injury. Greg Ward, this is a big one on in my opinion, EJ, because he's such a glue guy, with the team. The from our understanding, everyone in the building has high respect for Greg Ward, the former college quarterback at the University of Houston. But I think he's only participated in, I think it was the first two
yeah,
practices before he sustained a toe
yep,
injury,
I believe
and he's
that's
been
right.
out. Yeah, and he's been out since. And when you're a guy that's considered on the bubble, from an outsider's perspective, it's just tough to see, especially at a position where, as you know, you've written about guys like Britton Covey, Devin Allen. You mentioned Rager. These guys are fighting for those spots. So he's been a guy that's been out due to that toe injury. And just a couple more reminders. Jason Kelsey has obviously been out with his elbow injury. Cam Jurgens has been playing in his place and quite admirably,
Yeah,
if we must admit. And really just a couple dings popping up here to the defensive back room. Andre Chachere, he's had a groin injury these past couple days. Josiah Scott has had a soft tissue with a hamstring. And Josh Jobe, who we thought did very well in the second preseason game, popped up on the report with an elbow injury. So again, some various issues here, but I think the ones that should really be concerned, I guess, are these guys that we mentioned earlier fighting for these final few roster spots. This is kind of like, again, EJ, the Eagles, they definitely have the tape on all of these guys, from all the practices that they participated in, every single rep. But you cannot replicate game action, and that's what they're going to get here tonight in the final. I guess what you might call a tryout, or try to put on tape here for the Eagles or elsewhere for these guys battling for these spots.
yeah. I mean, especially with a guy like Josh Jobe, who I thought had a really good week 2 performance, preseason week 2 performance. This was an important game, especially because when you think about it, the 53 is like that's a week 1 roster. So if he's not healthy in week 1, I mean, is it really worth squeezing him onto the 53? I think with a guy like him or a guy like Greg Ward, even some of these guys who maybe have an injury that'll keep them on the sideline for 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks. Maybe they put them on the initial 53. and then they put him on IR,
Mhm.
and then they clear the roster spot. Now the tricky thing with that is you kind of have to do, a wink wink nod with a veteran player. You say we're releasing you, and then you have to come back. Don't sign anywhere. We'll sign you in 3 days after we put this guy on IR. They did that with Cravon LeBlanc. I think it was last year. So there's a little bit of maneuverings that might happen here. That again, that's what makes the 53 man roster announcement so intriguing because we've, like you mentioned earlier, we've been here for a month. We have a good sense of who they like and who they maybe don't like as much. I think if it weren't for this type of stuff, like we would be almost 100% in predicting who's on the roster. But there's a lot more that goes into it than is even we can figure out. So yeah, I think with a guy like Josh Jobe, Josiah Scott, I think Sassere is kind of in a tier above that as far as like roster security goes. I would say he's maybe slightly above a roster bubble guy because of his special teams contributions. But those two guys, those guys are guys trying to get on the roster, and this game would have been big for them.
Yeah, certainly, EJ. And you mentioned those intricacies of the front office and the tricks that they do, to create this initial 53-man roster. We like calling it initial because, like what you mentioned, just days following that, they can make certain moves to bring guys back. Like, guys like Jordan Howard last year,
Hmm.
Rick Lovato, even their long snapper, we saw. They were without for about a day before
Yeah.
re-signing him back. So there are definitely some tricks that they can do as they create this initial 53-man roster. So, take that as a side note as we hear from the team leading up to Tuesday. Again, EJ, they started with 90, they got down to 85, they are at 80, and then Tuesday's the big day. They have to get down to 53 players heading into week one. EJ, what do you think? It's about time, I think, we head into our favorite section called What You Said. And again, a reminder to everyone back home, you can submit your questions at inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. We'll be talking to you all throughout the game right there at that link. And when you submit your questions and comments throughout the week, they'll have a chance that to be read on every show here on Game Day Central. EJ, our first one comes from Frosty, who says the Birds need a running back they can count on. Boston Scott is great, but limited by size. Kenneth Gainwell? Question mark. I cannot figure him out. EJ, let's talk some running backs because we mentioned that Miles Sanders has been out. It's worth noting Miles is in the final year of his rookie deal. He's obviously seeking an extension. He wants to show that he belongs in this league, that he deserves a multi-year extension. The issue with Miles, it's not explosiveness, EJ, as a stat that we like to refer to. He's third in the NFL since 2019 in regards to yards per carry. He's averaging more than 5 yards per touch. Uh, what the concern is his injury history. Last year he sustained multiple injuries. He has not played a full season. And then we've got guys here that Frosty mentioned: Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell. I'm a little bit higher than on Kenny Gainwell. Compared to the commenter here. He's had an up and down camp. He rebounded last week in the second preseason game with a touchdown. Boston Scott also had a touchdown. I think they're okay with this group. I know they don't have Jordan Howard back, obviously, but even Jason Huntley, he provides some burst and speed. EJ, you're a big guy, and I know you like talking power running backs. Do they necessarily need that type to fit this running back room? What's your take again on the running back situation here?
Yeah, I don't really think that a power back is a total necessity in this offense with the current personnel they have. I think, the guy, I think Frosty says Boston Scott's limited by size. I mean, don't tell Boston that. I think that he gets some kind of miscast sometimes because of his height as a, quick, undersized back. Like, I don't even want to say Darren Sproles because Darren Sproles was also the type of guy who, he had more pop than you might expect. I mean, I think Boston is actually more of a physical runner than a
Mhm.
runner who relies on quickness.
He
Kenny
also
Gainwell was
likes
really,
to be the security guard or bouncer,
yeah. So he's got some
playfully.
muscle, right? Yeah,
When his teammates like to go on the podium, he likes to
yeah.
stand next to them and let them know that he's their security detail.
He might not be very tall, but he can be an opposing force. So I think that he can, be that red zone back at times. I think that Kenny Gainwell, I know he was productive in the red zone last year. I think he led the team. He was second on the team in touchdowns by the end of the year. So he's a productive guy in the red zone. And Jalen, you got it. It all comes back to Jalen. Number one, Jalen runs with with power, and he's very productive in those areas. And also, I mean, we're seeing it across the league. Quarterbacks who can move in the red zone are just really dangerous in that area because it's an extra, it's +1 in the run game, as everybody talks about. So I don't think they need a short yardage back or a power back. And, let me just add this one note about Miles and Kenny. I think with Miles, you're absolutely right. Like he's been productive when he's been healthy, but being healthy has been the biggest question. And there's really no way to sugarcoat it. The hamstring is a concern right now because I mean the indication is he should be ready by week 1. But we've seen this with Miles before where he kind of has a soft tissue injury or, some kind of injury that's nagging and he comes back because he's 100%, but it kind of pops back up and he's not really right for the rest of the year. So it's not ideal that he's missed this much time, not just because, I don't think running backs need, an abundance of carries, but the fact that now we're going on, what's it been, 2 weeks with the hamstring? I mean, maybe going on 2 weeks with the hamstring. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. And just this last note I'll give you on Kenny Gainwell. It's like I know it might be hard to figure out what you're getting from him right now, but I think it's important to keep in mind that he's the type of guy that benefits from being moved across the formation. He can play, as a slot receiver. You can put him in motion. He can kind of almost be like a gadget back at times. And you're not going to see that in the preseason because they don't want to show anything. This is the most vanilla version of the Eagles offense we're going to see. So I would say, maybe preach a little bit of patience there. I think that the way that he's utilized in the regular season might be a lot different than what you saw against the Browns and what you've seen in the preseason so far.
Yeah, certainly. Like what you mentioned, those two guys specifically, you include Jalen there. Those are your 1, 2, and 3 in regards to touchdown leaders last year. Jalen Hurts led the Eagles in touchdowns, followed by Boston Scott and Kenny Gainwell. I think it's worth mentioning Miles. It might have been an outlier, but he had 0 touchdowns last year. He failed to reach the end zone. But again, an explosive rusher when healthy, averaging over 5 yards per carry since 2019. That's top 3 in the NFL behind Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor. Some good company to be in. We'll continue to monitor Miles' status, that hamstring, as we head into week 1, which is going to be 2 weeks away here, EJ, before heading to Detroit. EJ, a
Can't
couple
wait.
more questions and comments here. From David Gomez on Twitter, he asks, "Are the starters playing some?" We kind of discussed this earlier, EJ. I would be surprised if we saw them. The extent, maybe one series. And again, I know there have been other quarterbacks, other starters throughout the league. Tom Brady, has played in or is playing in the preseason week 3. But in regards to this team, I mean, I think we were just mentioning health with Miles and the other players prior to this. I think the Eagles and how they've approached practice length, how they've approached conditioning. I think if they're going to prioritize their players' health, that they keep the starters out. And I know that it's great sunny conditions here right now in Miami, but no need to risk throwing Jalen out there, especially if Nick Sirianni is going to go out and say he had his best practice on Wednesday against the Dolphins. They know what they have in him. What benefit would it be trotting him out there and others here for this last game?
Yeah, so I'm going to give our viewers a little bit of an Inquirer exclusive here. I'm trying to see who this is. Looks like Davion Taylor, actually, in shorts out there. Although I feel
Okay.
like maybe it's not Davion. I feel like he's got to
Hmm.
be. I was wondering if it was AJ, which is a testament to AJ that I'm looking at a linebacker and thinking it's him.
Hmm.
So I see someone out there with shorts, but I see a lot of the starters out there in shorts right now, which would suggest to me that they're not playing. I think the guys who are playing are, going to be in uniform by now and, warming up for pregame. I think a lot of these guys are just coming out here to get a workout in and then watch the rest of the game. I think it's twofold, keeping the starters healthy, like you mentioned, and also just getting as much tape on the guys who are on the roster bubble, people who you really need answers on, getting as much on them as you possibly can. So I think you will see a lot of people who are battling for roster spots during this game. I don't think you'll see many of the established roster during tonight.
Of course. All right, EJ. Our last comment question comes from brother John on Twitter. He asks, or it's really a comment, and this we talked about this earlier. Let's expand on it though. He says checkdowns aren't always bad. Nick Sirianni said it was Jalen's best practice. I think it means what he took what the defense gave him. EJ, a lot of pundits, fans, they want to see in these joint sessions, these practices, these training camp practices specifically for quarterbacks to try things out. AJ Brown and Jalen have discussed this. would Jalen, try a throw in practice that he might not necessarily try in the game, and he wants to see if it works. There have certainly been situations throughout this summer that Jalen has done that, but in these live full team periods on Wednesday that we're referring to specifically, again, EJ, you and I were both there. He did not throw downfield that many times. There was that one pass to Devontae. He did connect with I think it was AJ Brown. That although that might have been during a 7-on-7 on a post. Um, but Nick Sirianni, like what you alluded to earlier, you mentioned earlier, he has a lot more insight into what the offense is doing on the field. We're just observing. We're here to report what we see. From that perspective, again, it might be what you said. The offense might not have been as crisp. Receivers might not be running necessarily the route trees that they were supposed to be. Jalen is taking what the defense is giving him. Again, a lot of checkdowns during Wednesday's practice, but uh, maybe that's what the defense is giving him. Like kind of like what Brother John says. Nick Sirianni
Yeah.
called it his best practice.
Or maybe it was that was the directive for the day. Maybe Jalen was told right before practice by Nick Sirianni, "Hey, be efficient today. Take what they're giving you. Completions. Get the rhythm going get the rhythm going by hitting your open receivers." Maybe that was it. And the last thing I want to say about the Jalen Hurts best day thing, really quickly here, is like 2019 when the Eagles had joint practices against the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson looked terrible. He looked just like he was going to have a terrible year. Didn't have a lot of success throwing the ball. And Lamar Jackson went on to win the MVP that year. So don't read too much into these training camp practices. We've seen guys look awesome and not have great years. We've seen guys look terrible and have great years. Now there are exceptions. Like I remember Brady was here that year or in 2019 as well, and like the ball doesn't touch the ground with him, and it's like unbelievable to watch him work. But some guys, especially mobile quarterbacks, like practice isn't always the best barometer for where they're at. So
Mhm.
I do think that it's all we have to go off of right now. So it's easy to kind of overreact to it or go one way or the other with it. But I do think that we'll have our answers soon enough. We'll have our answers in a couple of weeks on where Jalen's at.
Yeah, and in regards to that specific practice, there's a lot of comparisons. Just even heading into this week with Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa, the
Yeah.
Dolphins quarterback. Tua had a great practice on Wednesday against Jonathan Gannon's defense. It felt like you referred to Tom Brady in that specific practice session, not touching with the ball, not touching the ground. There weren't that many incompletions as Tua went against this Eagles defense. So, when you're comparing that, and then on the other field, you see Jalen throwing a lot of checkdowns, of course, there are going to be comparisons. But there was that one play that Nick Sirianni referenced. And I checked back again on our notes, and there was that specific play. It was a third down in full team. Uh, Jalen Hurts, he checked down, threw into the flat to Jack Stoll. And I remember on that specific play, Emmanuel Agba and Jalen Phillips, they're two edge rushers here in Miami. They're two featured edge rushers. They had, I mean, Jalen, he certainly made the right read in that instance. Nick Sirianni brought it up for a reason in getting the ball out quick there to Jack Stoll because within seconds in live play, that's a sack. So, again, that's just one specific instance that Nick Sirianni referenced. EJ, it's almost time to wrap up, but let's get over to our tweet of the week. This was a good one here. And there it is. It is our colleague Jeff McClain. He is quoting Devontae Smith, the Eagles wide receiver, who told us he has a Wawa addiction. EJ, do you have a Wawa addiction? Are you a big fan of the Hoagies?
I am team Mike Sealski on the Wawa hoagies these days. Now,
Ooh.
when I was in high school, I had a Wawa addiction. I mean, I'd eat the
Hmm.
cheesesteak, the turkey hoagie, chicken salad hoagie, anything. Now, I kind of stay away from the Wawa stuff. If I'm gonna get something, it's gonna be like a panini, or they make those chicken Caesar wraps that are really good. So I don't have the addiction, but I mean, I listen. I think it's working for Devontae. He does look a little bit bigger this year.
Yeah, he certainly does, and I'll plug a story that during the off season I went and watched him work out from his off season home here in Florida actually. But for him to go out and say that, I think that's kind of just like, uh, you know, he's putting on the Philly culture. I mean, he's getting used to the
Smart move.
region. Obviously as a first round pick, there's a lot of attention that comes with that, a lot of hype with him being a former Heisman Trophy winner. That's and then if we're not mistaken, I think he also has a partnership with Wawa there with Dallas Goddard and Avante Maddox. So maybe for him a shameless plug into that.
Hey,
For me,
we're
on
all
my
doing
end,
them.
EJ,
Yeah.
yeah, we all are. For me, on my end,
Yeah.
I'm a fan of Wawa, man. They're obviously it's sprinkled all over the city, and there's one very convenient by the NovaCare complex that we do enjoy going to from time to time after
Hmm.
practices. EJ, before we wrap up, let's get over to predictions. Give me one training camp preseason darling to make this team, to make that 53 man here on
Ooh.
Tuesday.
That's a tough one. I would have gone Britton Covey a couple weeks ago. He kind of lost some momentum. I mean, listen, I'll just go Marlon Toipulo too. I'll shamelessly plug my story on him. I think if you look at him right now, it's like, oh yeah, of course he's going to make the roster. But going into training camp, I mean, that was hardly a foregone conclusion. I think he put in a lot of work in the offseason. I know he did. He talked to me about it. He came down, he came in a little bit slimmed down and a little bit improved on his technique, and he's carved himself out a role in this defense. So yeah, give me Marlon.
All right, I'm going to stick at quarterback. Reed Sinnett, a guy that many are familiar here with down in Miami. But after last week's game, I think, not that he needed to put on additional tape. He's got plenty of tape on him from last year's preseason when he was a member of the Dolphins. But I mean, that throw to Devin Allen, that completion, it was almost 60 air yards. I mean, that was a cannon. And, who knows what they do with Gardner Minshew. Obviously, Nick Sirianni is a huge Gardner Minshew fan. It's very well documented on their relationship. But at this point, I mean, Gardner Minshew, he's also a trade asset. I mean, guys like who you mentioned earlier, Andre Dillard, Jalen Rager, he's also a guy that they can move. And, um, you know, any reliable quarterback, any quarterback game manager in today's NFL, especially here as we get closer to the regular season, that's valuable for NFL teams. And, Howie Roseman is always ready to pick up the phone. Who knows what happens there? But I think if they were to cut Reed Sinnett, I don't think he'd clear waivers. I think that he might end up signing somewhere else. So if the Eagles do value him in the way that we might believe them to, I'd see them keeping three quarterbacks. I believe EJ, the last time they kept three was in 2018. So it's been a few years since Howie Roseman has done that, but it is part of their history. EJ, so again, Marlon Tupelotu, that's your training camp, darling. He has looked much improved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, certainly. EJ's picking with Marlon, and I'm going Reed Sinnett. We'll throw a Britton Covey in there. EJ did that great story on him. You can check out
It's
at
gonna be close.
Inquirer.com.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
see.
I mean, maybe he pops off and takes one back to the house
Yeah,
today. We will see.
this will be a big night for him for sure. Yeah.
It will be, especially if guys like AJ Brown, Devontae Smith are not playing. He'll certainly get those reps, and also at returner, which is
Hmm.
where if he's going to make the team, even he's told you that that he wants to, or he sees himself making the team as a returner. And again, he has been technically sound in that regard, running north to south as opposed to east to west.
Yeah.
EJ, it is time to wrap up. The next time I think we get together, our next pregame show is going to be at Detroit, September 11th, up there for the regular season opener. Are you excited for the regular season, EJ? We've got through training camp.
Meaningful. I mean, listen, today has meaning for some of these guys. I don't want to play. I don't want to downplay it, but true, meaningful football where the games count. It's going to be really nice. I'm excited for it.
All right, let's wrap up here, EJ. I want to let everyone back home. I just want to thank everyone for tuning into another edition of Inquire Live at Game Day Central. Make sure you stick around on inquire.com/Eagles Game Day. That's where you can continue to follow all of our coverage. Myself, EJ, and Jeff McClain are all here in Miami. You'll be able to interact with us throughout the game, ask us questions, debate what happens. Who knows? Next time on the show, your questions might have a chance to be read on our next show. For EJ Smith, my birthday twin, I am Josh Tolentino for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thank you so much for tuning in to Game Day Central. We will see you next time, week 1 at Detroit. Thanks for tuning in.
See you guys.